Welcome back to the deep dive. We are really getting into it today, ripping the cover off some complex stuff, taking some pretty dense source material and trying to pull out the knowledge that, really matters.
Yeah, today we're stepping into something quite profound. It's almost like cosmic jurisprudence, if you will.
Hmm.
We're not just looking at minor details, we're dissecting what these sources present as the logical architecture of divine governance itself.
That's a great way to put it. Our source stack for this dive, it focuses entirely on one intricate theological blueprint. It's all about the detailed mechanics of how divine justice, or gongui, as the source sometimes calls it, isn't just like announced, but rigorously proven, established across the whole cosmos.
And these sources, they lay out an almost legalistic framework. It's fascinating. They involve two specific entities. They're called the first God and the second God. And they meticulously detail the steps needed for atonement and judgment, the goal. To satisfy this standard of absolute, uncompromising fairness.
Right, and the central philosophical problem these documents tackle is, well, it's timeless, isn't it? How can an all-powerful being uphold absolute justice, which logically demands consequences for every wrong, and at the same time extend radical mercy, which means pardon, forgiveness? These two things seem like they're fundamentally opposed.
Exactly. And the sources argue this tension, this paradox. It can't just be wished away. It's not solved by a simple decree from on high. It demands a very specific, singular solution. The sources argue it necessitated an ultimate sacrifice, one so incredibly costly and so transparent that it proves the fairness of the whole system to all observers. To every single entity, the sources refer to as a creature, or pigeonmul.
So our goal today is to synthesize the structure for you, the listener. We're focusing on the, let's say, the relentless logic presented here, the specific high-stakes steps taken, and, crucially, the immense price tag attached to forgiveness, all implemented, according to these texts, by God to fundamentally prove his fairness and the stability of the cosmic rule set. It's really an intellectual exercise in understanding a concept of perfect governance.
Let's definitely start right there, at that foundation. Because the material insists that every single step in this grand design, it has to serve one primary mission above all else, the affirmation and the clear demonstration of the first God's perfect, universal divine justice.
Okay, let's unpack that central claim straight away. The ultimate purpose here is proof. It's apparently not enough for God to just be just. He must prove it to every creature. So if that's the case, what's the single definitive mechanism the sources point to? How is this proof actually achieved?
Well, the documents, they pinpoint one specific event, one you could say seismic decision. And that's presented as the ultimate guarantee of fairness.
Yeah.
The first God abandoning the second God. This specific act is framed as the central mechanism for establishing universal, unshakable justice.
Wow, okay. Now, that's a profound claim, especially because, as the sources make clear, this abandonment doesn't happen while the second God is, in his original divine state. It happens after the second God has willingly taken on the state of a creature. That seems critical.
Oh, absolutely critical. That distinction is paramount in these texts. The sources explicitly state that the second God became a creature, pigeonmul, and voluntarily accepted all the vulnerability that comes with that temporary status. And his role was very specific. He was to act as the ultimate representative, the one displaying God's justice to all the other creatures.
Okay.
So the abandonment, therefore, it's explicitly cited as the way the first God affirms, the word used is huachingasyata, his justice. It's the moment the law is applied without any prejudice to the highest possible representative imaginable.
And what's the intended takeaway for all the creatures who are presumably watching this cosmic drama unfold? What are they supposed to conclude from this?
The conclusion, the core takeaway, is meant to be the absolute unshakable stability of the rule of law. This radical act demonstrates, according to these sources, that God's divine justice, gongwi, is absolutely unchanging. The phrase is "Jeldero bayanhaji aniundanion jinri."
No backdoors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No backdoors, no political exceptions, no loopholes whatsoever. Even when the law's demands apply directly to this divine entity who's acting as the representative.
Yeah, I can see logic there. I mean, if any judicial system is going to be truly trusted by its population, if creatures are going to operate within that system without suspicion, they absolutely must see that the rules apply equally to everyone. And that includes, crucially, the closest associate of the lawgiver.
Right.
If the first God had, say, intervened and rescued the second God at the very last moment, well, then the law would be revealed as conditional, wouldn't it? Justice would look like it's subject to favoritism.
Precisely. And that's what the sources seem laser-focused on eliminating any argument from the creature based on bias or favoritism. By allowing the representative to suffer the full consequence demanded by the law, God effectively removes the ability for any future creature to stand up and claim, hey, the rules don't apply equally to everyone.
That prevents that particular challenge to the system's legitimacy.
It cuts it off at the root.
Okay, so that moves us to what feels like maybe the most radical theological claim in this entire stack of sources. The idea that the law itself is somehow more important than even the lawgiver's own personal relationships.
It is indeed. And we really should spend some time dissecting the profound implications of that, particularly drawing from source 3 in our material. The sources give us specific proof points about the sheer gravity of the command or the law. The term used is gi maya.
Okay, so what are those specific proof points? How do they elevate the command to this, well, almost impossible status?
The gravity is measured by the cost. It's always measured by the cost incurred to uphold it. The sources state very clearly that the first God chose to respect the command, the law, so highly, so absolutely, that he was willing to abandon his entirety, or all. The word is John Bodvoision, the second God.
Wait, hold on a sec. Let's just pause right there. His entirety. That's arguing that the stability and the sanctity of the command are held in even higher regard than the intrinsic unity or the relationship within the Godhead itself. It's basically saying the law is the supreme operating system of the cosmos, above literally everything else.
It is framed as the ultimate statement of priority. And you have to think about the implication for cosmic stability. If the law could be set aside, even for the most precious relationship imaginable, this bond between the first and second God, then what possible guarantee is there that the law won't be set aside later for, say, a particularly powerful creature, or for political expediency, or for any other future circumstance that might arise?
Yeah, if the law is shown to be conditional, even once, then the whole cosmic structure becomes inherently unstable, doesn't it? Future wrongdoers would always have this little sliver of hope that maybe they can find a loophole, maybe an exception could be made for them, and that makes genuine obedience less likely, you'd think.
That's exactly the logical foundation the sources are constructing. By demonstrating this incredible severity of commitment to the command, by paying this unthinkable price of abandonment, the first God proves in this framework that the command is the absolute, inviolable truth upon which all reality rests. It's foundational.
So this act, this abandonment, it serves two really crucial functions in the judicial process, doesn't it? It's not just about cosmic stability in the abstract, but it's also about the transparency of the judgment process itself.
Exactly right. Two key functions. First, you said it demonstrates this unwavering, ultimate respect given to the command. And second, crucially, it shows that judgment is fair. The phrase used is dongjong and simpian, for absolutely everyone, to such a degree that even the second God wasn't spared abandonment when he was representing the creature's debt.
Okay, so if I'm a creature and I'm observing this whole cosmic transaction, I literally cannot claim that the judicial process is biased. I might not like the severity of the consequence, maybe I disagree with the law itself, but I cannot dispute the universality of its application. The system applies to the divine representative just as much as it applies to me.
And that immediate elimination of any potential claims of favoritism. That is precisely the intended effect, according to these tests. The forces are really focused on ensuring that creatures can confidently trust. The term is wanjoni sinroi halsu iji God's rule, and that they can confirm for themselves through this observation that he governs justly.
It removes all rational grounds for doubt.
That's the aim. Regarding the impartiality of the divine administration, yes.
It feels like it transforms the act of submission. It shifts it from maybe coerced obedience born out of fear to something more like voluntary compliance born out of certainty. You comply because you know the rules are absolutely stable and the judge is demonstrably fair.
That is presented as the elevated goal, yes. One of the sources, source 6, actually states that God determined that creatures would voluntarily submit to his rule, knowing with absolute certainty that God is fair. So this whole mechanism, this divine abandonment, it functions as the ultimate constitutional guarantee, if you like, of fairness within the universe presented in these texts.
Okay, this is a really spectacular foundation you've laid out. It establishes the law as supreme, and the respect for that law as the highest value, proven by the ultimate conceivable cost. But if that establishes the gravity of the law, the obvious next question we have to ask is, and this is where the sources seem to get into the the math of it, what price is actually required to fix the damage, to remedy the breaking of such a supreme command.
And that leads us directly into the concept of the weight of sin and the cost of forgiveness.
Right. So if divine justice is absolute, as established, and the command is valued even above the unity of the Godhead itself, then violating that command, well, it must carry an unimaginable price tag.
Yeah.
This next section of our sources seems to calculate the cost of mercy.
And the calculation presented is, well, it's uncompromising. The sources define the weight of sin and the required price in terms that make it absolutely clear. Sin isn't seen as just a minor deviation. It's presented as a cosmic catastrophe that requires a solution of equal magnitude.
Okay, let's start with how they define the transgression itself. How do the sources emphasize the severity, the seriousness of the violation?
The text focuses very intensely on proving the severity, the weight.
Yeah.
The word iamjungam is used of God's justice, and also the intrinsic heaviness, mujimum, of the sin that actually broke the command. The logic follows directly from part 1. Since the command is respected to such an incredible degree, the degree that the first God would abandon the second God, then any violation of that command must carry a correlative catastrophic weight.
It's almost like the violation introduces a kind of logical impossibility into the very fabric of reality. If the law demands a consequence, but mercy tries to just bypass it, you've essentially broken the cosmic operating system. Is that the idea?
That's a fantastic way to put it, actually. The sources seem to posit what we could call an inescapable law that governs the structure of reality itself. They state quite explicitly that the structure of time and space, sagongon is the term, is sustained in such a way that forgiving sin requires a corresponding price or cost to be paid. It's built into the system.
So forgiveness isn't just like an administrative pardon. It's not just God saying, okay, you're forgiven. It's more like a judicial requirement that reality itself imposes. If a balance is disturbed, it absolutely must be rebalanced.
Think of it like a kind of cosmic conservation principle.
Yeah.
Like energy can't be created or destroyed. In this system, it seems consequences can't just be wished away either. They must be settled. If the command which these texts present as the law holding time and space together is violated, a debt is incurred. And that debt needs settlement to maintain the stability of Sagongan.
Yeah.
If that debt is just ignored, the implication is the whole system could potentially unravel.
Wow. So the very existence of the universe, according to this framework, is somehow contingent upon this debt being satisfied. Okay, that explains why the price has to be so incredibly high.
Exactly. And the text reiterates this point. For the command to retain the respect of the creatures, and for the sin to actually be pardoned, a very precious being, Mao Guhanjanje, must be sacrificed. Anything less than a truly precious being would, in effect, minimize the crime. It would suggest the command isn't really that valuable after all, which could, encourage future violations.
Okay, that makes sense. If the command is infinitely valuable because it governs this infinite, timeless reality under an infinite God, then logically, only an infinite payment can satisfy that debt. So what's the only candidate the sources identify as possessing that necessary infinite worth?
The sources are absolutely unequivocal on this point. They provide the definitive answer. The ultimate price, the ultimate substitute required is God himself. The phrase is Gajangguhan Jonje Nuun Hananim Jasin Isida. God himself is the price.
That feels like the only logical conclusion you can draw from the premises they laid out in part 1, doesn't it? If the law is supreme and violating it incurs an infinite debt, then yeah, only the infinite being can clear the ledger. The creator has to become the currency.
And this is precisely the structure of what the text called the atonement transaction. It requires the lawgiver to step into the role of the payer. The first God decided to abandon the second God, who, remember, had become a creature specifically in order to forgive the sins of the creatures.
Okay, so that clarifies the ultimate judicial purpose of the abandonment we talked about earlier. It wasn't just arbitrary suffering, it was the necessary self-payment required by this cosmic law, a law that God himself established within time and space.
Yes, it demonstrates definitively that the cost of forgiveness is God himself. The phrase, Yonseo Idaigaga, God Hananemi Saranian Sasilual Alja Hasigi, points to making this known. This serves as the necessary self-paid price. The text really emphasized that the creatures need to understand that the law remains unbroken, its integrity absolute, even while this radical forgiveness is being extended. It's presented as the highest display of integrity imaginable.
It certainly is a masterful solution, conceptually, to that justice-mercy paradox we started with. God fulfills the role of the righteous judge, demanding the payment the law requires, and simultaneously fulfills the role of the loving benefactor by providing and settling that cost himself. which means forgiveness is offered, but it's never ever at the expense of justice. Justice is upheld.
Exactly. And this clear demonstration of payment, it's intended to allow the creature to fully trust the fairness of the entire system, even while they receive a pardon they definitely didn't earn. But, and this is crucial as we transition to the next part, the transaction requires more than just infinite value. The substitute, the payment itself, must be morally flawless. If the payment itself is, damaged goods, it contaminates the whole transaction.
Ah, right. The quality of the currency matters as much as the amount. Okay, so we've established the substitute has to possess infinite worth, identified as God himself. Now we get into the really rigorous legal and moral qualifications. Why, according to these sources, is the second God the only candidate capable of meeting this incredibly high standard? And what unique crucible of testing did he have to endure to prove it?
Yeah, this section of the material, it really functions like a judicial screening panel. It's
Yep.
all about ensuring the atonement sacrifice is legally impeccable, beyond any challenge. And the first step is defining the absolute prerequisites for even being eligible.
So, who gets immediately disqualified from being the substitute? What knocks you out of the running?
The disqualification criteria are sweeping. First, any being that has actually committed sin, biamjohejiana, is immediately out. That's obvious enough, but maybe more critically, any being that even has the potential to sin, biamjohanungsang, is also disqualified.
Wow, okay. The inclusion of potential to sin, that eliminates every single being that is merely a creature, right? Because by definition, to be created implies having choice, and choice inherently implies the possibility of making the wrong choice, of transgressing.
That is precisely the implication drawn in these texts. The logic demands that a sinner cannot be sacrificed for another sinner. It's stated very plainly. If the substitute already carries moral debt, then the system isn't solving anything. It's just swapping one debtor for another. Furthermore, a being without worth gachika yomeninjonje cannot substitute for the violation of the infinitely valued command.
Because that would devalue the command itself.
Exactly. The command must be highly respected. So the only way presented to ensure both infinite worth and zero moral debt, past, present, and future potential, is for God to assume the identity of a creature, but crucially, without adopting the moral imperfection inherent in creaturehood.
So, yeah, the second God emerges as the only viable candidate by this logic. But how is his flawlessness actually proven? Proven beyond any shadow of a doubt. I mean, he accepted the condition of creaturehood, which, as you said, is inherently volatile. That seems like a huge risk.
This is where the sources define the ultimate test. They highlight two really unique credentials, and they focus on the conditions under which this perfection was maintained. First, the second God took on cursed flesh body. The phrase is Joju Badun Ukerul Ipsugoro.
Cursed flesh.
Yes. This means he accepted the full, raw vulnerability, the limitations, the intense, tempting pressures inherent in a physical existence that is prone to weakness, suffering, and ultimately mortality.
Okay, so this is way more than just, like, inhabiting a physical body. It's accepting the conditions of the test in the most compromised state possible. Because if he had remained perfectly pure, but stayed in some protected, divine form, the test wouldn't really be meaningful to the creatures who actually live in that cursed body, would it?
Exactly. The sources demand that the test be realistic, observable within the creature's frame of reference. And the successful result of that incredibly difficult test is the second crucial point. The second God absolutely never committed sin. Danhan biamdo hazichiana aniondenun. Not once.
Never.
And this absolute sinlessness, the sources stress, isn't just an assertion. It's verifiable. It's proven. It's established within the constraints of time and space. Sigangani jongyang duenda. It's a historical fact within that framework.
Okay, but I need to bring in a point of creature logic here, maybe play devil's advocate. If I'm a creature watching this, I might concede, okay, fine, he hasn't sinned yet. But how can I, as a finite observer trapped in time, be absolutely certain that this substitute will never sin in the future, especially given that this cursed body he adopted is defined by its potential for weakness? My knowledge is limited to the past. The law seems to demand future perfection, too. How is that gap bridged?
That is the precise intellectual hurdle the sources anticipate and address, since creatures, by their nature, cannot see the future. Source 21 makes this point. God must establish an objective, temporal standard of righteousness. The term used is EU Hangi, the limit or boundary of righteousness. This standard has to verify the substitute's perfection beyond any reasonable doubt, operating within the limits of the creature's perception and understanding.
Okay, so what is that standard? What's the specific test set by God to prove that the second God isn't just currently flawless, but is eternally reliable as the payment?
The standard, as established in the sources for the atonement sacrifice, (Unshakeable), is this: never sinning while enduring the entire duration of life within the cursed body. Successfully passing this complete test proves the substitute's internal, infinite commitment to the law. It demonstrates that his obedience isn't just circumstantial, it's absolute, even under the maximal duress that creaturehood imposes.
That really is the highest possible moral hurdle imaginable. To live a full creature life, experiencing all the temptation, the pressure, the suffering inherent in that flawed physical form, but remaining perfectly obedient to the command throughout. And because the second God was successful, the sources logically emphasize that he was without sin, and therefore he didn't need forgiveness himself.
Correct. Sources 25 and 26 make that clear. His sacrifice was purely in exchange for others. It wasn't about his own self-redemption. He had nothing to be redeemed from.
Okay, so the standard is set, the test is passed. Now, how does God demonstrate this ultimate proof, this limit of righteousness to all the creatures watching? How is it made undeniable? This seems to bring us back to physical reality.
It does. We return to the ultimate consequence of sin within this system.
Yeah.
Death.
Death.
Exactly. The limit of righteousness, established by God in time and space, utilizes the definition and finality of death. Death, in this structure, is the undeniable penalty, the final consequence of sin. If the second God had sinned even once, death would have claimed him permanently. He would have stayed dead.
And the proof, then, that sin's claim on him was nullified, that he never sinned.
It's the triumph over death itself. The sources state that this established standard allows creatures who overcome death, specifically through resurrection or transformative change, brûle by enoi, to be recognized as having definitively conquered sin. So the resurrection becomes the visible, undeniable certification that the second God's perfect life fully satisfied all the law's demands, even while he was in the cursed body.
So the resurrection isn't just presented as a miracle, it's actually a judicial decree. It's the ultimate proof, visible in time and space, that the substitute successfully passed the test, and therefore the payment offered is valid, it's good. If death, the ultimate penalty for sin, cannot hold him, then the sin that causes death must have been absent.
That is precisely the legal implication drawn. It creates this incredibly tight, closed loop of necessary conditions. Infinite worth is secured because he is divine. Zero moral debt is secured because of his perfect obedience while in the cursed body. And the verification of that perfect obedience is secured by his conquering of death. This final act confirms that the only being capable of meeting this ultimate, incredibly high standard is God who became a creature.
Wow.
And this ensures the substitution isn't only valuable enough, but it's legally, morally, and eternally impeccable. Flawless.
The level of detail, the logical structure in the source material is just striking. It really leaves no room for any judicial ambiguity regarding the qualifications of the one paying this cosmic debt. Okay, so everything we've discussed, the necessity of the payment, the infinite value, the flawless qualifications of the payer, it all leads to the final critical question. How does this perfectly established system of justice then handle the creatures themselves, the ones who ultimately receive judgment?
And that brings us logically to the final stage described in these texts, the policy regarding final judgment.
Right. So justice is proven by the abandonment. The immense cost is paid by the flawless substitute. Now, what does this uncompromising, highly structured approach guarantee for the individual creatures when they face their final reckoning? The sources seem to make a really big point that the judgment can't just be fair, it has to be demonstrably public and clear to everyone.
Yes. The foundational rule remains absolutely consistent throughout the process. The demonstration of justice must be maintained right through to the end, including the final disposition of every single creature. God has determined, the sources say, to judge creatures fairly gonjagaj simpanasigiro. Fairness is the bedrock.
And what's the definition of that fairness specifically in the context of judgment? How does it work?
The foundation of it is what the texts present as the principle of retribution, but is framed as absolute proportionality. Each creature will be judged strictly according to the sins they actually committed. Gatjagabiomhan, jomankium simpanhasigiro jaktangasiota. And crucially, they will receive recompense exactly according to their conduct.
Punishment fits the crime.
Precisely. Punishment fits the crime, exactly. This ensures that absolute integrity of the universal law, the one established back in Part 1, is maintained right through to the sentencing phase.
Okay, that outcome certainly fits the definition of a fair judicial system. You receive the precise consequences dictated by your own actions, no more, no less. And the only possibility of pardon comes through that mechanism of substitution we just spent so much time discussing.
Correct. But, as you pointed out, the sources stress that just having procedural fairness isn't enough. The fairness has to be externally verified by all observers. So God determined to make the judgment entirely public, simpanul ganga hasiguro, full public disclosure.
That's a radical commitment, making it all public. It feels like the final check against any lingering suspicion, doesn't it? Why is this level of transparency seen as mandatory for cosmic governance, according to these texts?
It's presented as the policy of disclosure, and it seems designed to satisfy the cosmic jury, if you will, all the watching creatures. The actions hungry of each creature will be completely revealed and disclosed, every single one.
Everything.
Everything. The good deeds will be obvious, but critically, the hidden actions, the secret sins, they cannot be concealed. They will all be brought out into the open. This absolute level of disclosure ensures total, verifiable accountability for everyone watching the proceedings.
That's an intense proposition. The idea that every single hidden thought, every secret decision, every concealed deed will be laid bare for all to see. What specific judicial purpose does this extreme level of transparency serve beyond just simple accounting or record keeping?
It connects directly back to the core mandate from Part 1, establishing and maintaining unwavering trust in the entire system. This transparency is deemed necessary so that creatures do not misunderstand God's judgment.
Oh, okay.
If judgment were conducted behind closed doors, even if it was perfectly fair, observers could always harbor doubts, couldn't they? Doubts about the completeness of the evidence presented, or maybe about the impartiality of the final ruling. Public disclosure eliminates that possibility.
So, the audience of the judgment, all the other watching creatures, they are essentially witnesses whose satisfaction with the process is necessary for the long-term stability of the whole governance structure. Their confidence matters.
That is exactly right. And this transparency becomes particularly critical when dealing with the most severe punishments imaginable. The public disclosure is framed as necessary specifically to prevent misunderstanding regarding God, burning the wicked. The phrase used is "비엄쇼해자 볼타요 주기시는 하나님을 오해하지 않게 하시기로."
Right. That is perhaps the most difficult act of justice for any observer to accept, emotionally or philosophically. So if God must execute a final, irreversible judgment like that, the sources demand that the evidence presented and the entire process must be so overwhelmingly clear that there can be absolutely no ambiguity, no doubt, and definitely no misinterpretation of the divine character or the fundamental fairness of the ruling.
The judgment has to be universally recognizable as true and righteous, based entirely and solely on the exhaustive record of actions, the things recorded in the books mentioned in the sources. By disclosing all the evidence, even the actions the judged creature had hoped to keep hidden forever, God ensures that the final disposition of every single creature is recognized by all observers as justly deserved. And this upholds the entire intricate cosmic architecture of law, sacrifice, and judgment that the sources have so painstakingly detailed for us.
It really is the final check in a system that's designed, according to these texts, to be completely flawless, where every single step from establishing the gravity of the law to the payment of the infinite price, right through to the rendering of the final verdict, is based on absolute, demonstrable public truth.
The sources essentially map out a universe where the highest conceivable value is truth and stability, guaranteed by the law. And the mechanism by which justice and mercy are reconciled is this ultimate act of self-sacrifice, proven valid by the ultimate test. #OTEuro.
Okay, this has been an incredibly deep and really rigorous analysis of a specific theological and philosophical structure presented in these materials. Let's just quickly review the major themes for you, the learner, maybe by synthesizing the core logic we've uncovered here.
Sounds good. We began with the affirmation of justice, didn't we? The absolute foundation of God's governance, according to these texts, is this unwavering respect for the command. And that respect is proven by the almost unthinkable cost, the ultimate abandonment of the second God by the first God. That singular event universally established the unshakable, unchanging nature of the divine law.
Right. Then we explored the inescapable cost of breaking that law. The sources define this universe as fundamentally transactional, where sin creates an infinite debt because it violates a command of infinite value. Therefore, the only price sufficient for forgiveness had to be God himself, a self-paid price, implemented specifically to maintain cosmic fairness while allowing mercy.
Which led us directly to the rigorous qualifications, the necessity of the flawless substitute, the second God. He proved his unique suitability not just by being divine, which gave him infinite worth, but by successfully enduring the highest possible test, never sinning, not even once, while occupying the limited, compromised, cursed flesh. And his triumph over death served as the public, time and space certification of his judicial success, the proof.
And finally, we detailed the culmination of this whole system, a public and transparent judgment. This radical disclosure of every single creature's actions ensures that the final reckoning is universally recognized by all observers as fair and perfectly proportional, thereby eliminating any possibility of future doubt or dissent against the divine administration.
Yeah, the sources really provide a highly specific, almost blueprint-like logical argument for why every single component, the sacrifice, the payment, the test, the judgment, must be executed with absolute precision. And it's all centered, ultimately, on proving that God's law is respected above every other consideration imaginable.
It definitely posits an uncompromising kind of universe, one governed by absolute, almost self-enforcing justice, where every single action carries a corresponding consequence that absolutely must be settled one way or another. It certainly moved the conversation beyond just abstract notions of mercy and grounds it firmly in what's presented as cosmic judicial law.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with this final, maybe provocative thought to ponder. If the universal structure presented here is so uncompromising that only an infinite cost, the abandonment of the divine by the divine, can compensate for even a finite act of transgression, well, what does that truly imply about the intrinsic absolute value and the scope of the divine command itself, beyond just any individual sin?
That's a heavy question. It suggests the law isn't merely like a moral code imposed from the outside, but perhaps it's presented here as a foundational logical necessity for existence itself. The very essence of stability and coherence in the cosmos, valued by the lawgiver even above the relational integrity of the Godhead. If the structure of reality itself is sustained by the gravity of this law, the question then becomes, how do we even begin to calculate the worth of obedience in such a universe?
It's definitely something to mull over until our next deep dive.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us as we unpack the core mechanics of divine justice and the ultimate sacrifice as laid out in these fascinating sources. We'll see you next time.